This is your before and after story, where your first steps towards a new life-changing career begin. Southeastern College can take you there. We offer in-demand hybrid and online programs with hands-on training, led by in-field career professionals, and career services to put you on the path to a rewarding and fulfilling future. This is where your transformation begins. Southeastern College, your future is bright. Visit sec.edu to get started.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Historia Canadiana is recorded on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Cultural History of Canada. My name is Patrick, and with me, as always, is my co-host with the most, Mackenzie.
Yo!
We're here to talk about French-Canadian nationalism, baby!
No!
I know, in part.
Gosh darn it.
Yeah, and not the nationalism that you're thinking of, the sometimes okay one from the 70s. The really bad one that everyone dislikes now.
Oh, the one that like even the Quebecs were like, let's chill, you guys.
How about we don't?
How about we fucking don't?
Yeah, and then re-elected a similar person today, so that's cool.
I'm sorry, but I will say it. I do think like give him all the shit you want, but Jay Trudeau fucking took a swing with that speech. Holy shit!
Which one are you talking about?
Is one about the tariff response.
Oh, okay. I think we were talking about two different things, but yes, that's cool. Yes.
Yeah, that was actually a really good speech.
Yeah, I read a few articles about that were kind of interesting. Where, despite the fact that he is resigning, right, from head of the party, and he's not going to be the one going forward, that speech does put the Liberal Party in a bit of a better position than they were before, right? I still think the Conservatives are going to win the next election, but yeah.
But I don't think they'll have their majority.
Oh, interesting.
I don't think they'll have their super majority. Like, 'cause that was I think that's what a lot of news articles saying. Because if it is Carney, and it's just the way Mr. PP has been handling every response to Trump.
Yeah,
and he's fumbling the bag.
Yeah, they weren't expecting to have to pull on the Canadian nationalism train.
That's just it.
String or whatever.
Somehow the Liberals are winning Canadian nationalism.
Yeah. Shocking. I'm genuinely shocked.
I don't think it's as shocking as we think. I think a lot of people at their core in Canada is a nation of centrists in a lot of ways.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, that would.
And so I think people were only really pulling right because Jay Trudeau is such a fuckwit for the past while.
Yeah.
So I think
he didn't
now
really
that he's
pull through on his promise, and it just kind of disillusioned people.
Now that he's removing himself, and now that we have this far right extremism, and now we have this possible candidate with Carney, who's looking like much more aligned with a lot of people. Like, well, he's going to be another like centrist, a little bit to the right economics dude.
Yeah.
That is the message I think a lot of Canadians will get behind.
Yep. Did you already see that everyone is in the Liberal Party? I don't know if you saw that. Who's running is already backing down on the carbon tax promise that they had made. Because I guess they collectively decided that they can't go up against the powerhouse slogan of "Axe the Tax." The Conservatives have been launching, and so each and every one of them are like, "Yeah, we're gonna either freeze it or stop it and look towards other climate solutions." I'm like,
well, it's just going to be another tax under a different name,
right? Whatever.
It'll be the same tax with a different name. Fuck,
It's so disappointing that you're playing right into that hand because you're too lazy to actually explain what the tax actually does, right? Which is not tax every single person.
I think the Conservatives will probably still win.
Yeah.
But it's going to be on very shaky ground, and I don't think Pierre is going to be there for a very long time.
No, I don't think. Although I say that, but yet his mentor, Stephen Harper, was there for 2 terms, wasn't he?
One of them but was Stephen Harper actually had like different political climate, first of all.
Yes.
Post 9/11 world.
Yeah.
Now, like, yeah, I don't know. I think we'll see. It'll be an interesting. We live in fascinating times. But at the end of the day, so did our parents. Our parents lived in fascinating times, and their parents before them, and so on and so forth.
I think I would prefer the fascinating times of like my grandparents. The fascinating times now seem
the Red Scare, hiding under your desk for fear of a nuclear
Maybe
bomb.
Not. Like, but you know what I mean? Like, obviously that was terrible, but I don't see things changing much right now. Like, I don't see a climate of like genuine change possible. Nobody's talking on either side of the spectrum that we have available to us as if anything significant is going to change.
Well,
right, and that's what I find disappointing.
We don't have an enemy. You know, politics requires an enemy, and we just don't have it. So our enemy is each other.
Yeah, exactly. Right, and despite being terrible in many, many ways, what you did see in previous generations is a faith in and a willingness to actually try those changes. Right? And I think we've lost that.
Yeah.
Which is what makes
Well, that's because corporations and big business. Yeah, sorry to get so political, you guys, but this is going to be a very politically charged episode. We have a multi-minute tangent talking about, so going back to our grandparents and our great-grandparents' time, actually, let's cast to those fasting. This is the times that Patrick wants to live in. He said it here first. He wants to live in these times. So let's
go back
to
the vibe of the time, but not necessarily those times.
You want the vibes of Maurice Duplessis and bad French Canadian nationalism?
Not him specifically. Anyway, my point is not coming across properly. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, because I'm poking holes in it. Defend your position, Mr. PhD. I'm a high school teacher. If I outsmart you, that's pretty pathetic.
Because I wasn't planning on spending this much time on this. So I just launched something without thinking about it, okay?
Speaking of leaders of the Conservative Party, let's talk about Maurice Duplessis.
So first of all, before we get into that, if you want to support the show, you can do so through Patreon. We did skip an in our schedule this week because I was actually working on my PhD and teaching things. So
I'm in a monsoon.
Yes. So we just kind of like lost track of time.
Both equally important things to take care of.
No, your monsoon is much more important. But
I have to go out and like do a rain dance to make it stop.
I had to talk about H.P. Lovecraft. Much more important.
Oh, that's nice. I'm talking about Frankenstein with my students.
Oh, that's fun.
And I will say, there's nothing more baller than reading Frankenstein in the middle of a fucking monsoon.
Yo, for real. Oh, I wish Kimmy were here to tell that she's also talking about Frankenstein with her students.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. But yeah, great setup for Frankenstein. But yeah. So anyway, if you want to support the show, you can do so through Patreon. We obviously everyone who already does so, and we'll get kind of ranked on. We should be back on track.
Yeah, we just had those holidays,
Yes, a month ago.
Yeah, we were in a maple syrup coma for a long time.
I did release some interviews and all, so that's fine.
Yeah, this is us coming out of Patrick. I was basically I was the mosquito in the amber from Jurassic Park, but the amber was maple syrup, and Patrick was the Dr. Richard Hammond, and he had to like extract me and get me out, get my DNA.
The DNA that makes this show tick in the way that it does, which is chaotically and without.
I'm the frog DNA added to the dinosaur DNA.
It's wonderful.
Back to Michael and Dutch.
So, yeah, as you were saying, we're going to be talking about a specific moment. We're coming back to Quebec. We haven't talked about Quebec in a while in the history of our show.
And we could feel our Quebec forefathers getting angry about that.
Yeah. Your mom sending me a message being like, why don't you talk about Quebec in the 1930s? Which, fair enough. It is a very fascinating time.
Oh, when is Quebec not a fascinating time?
Honestly, though, it's just a weird, wild time all the time. Quebec is constantly the Wild West.
Oh, I had to explain what Quebec was like to some Australians out here when we were out one night. They couldn't fathom it.
Of course not. How do you explain that?
No, I explained it. I was just like, it's just sort of like this, blah, blah, blah. And then they're just like, what the fuck? And I'm like, so some guys were kept, like, they blew up some post offices because that was the symbol of the Queen. So guys got kept hostage in a trunk of a car, and they're just like, "That's insane." I'm like, it's fine. Everything's fine now.
Happens every few years or so.
Yeah, every couple of decades, A Trudeau comes into power and Quebec gets antsy.
So basically what the plan is for today's episode is talking a little bit about the context of the 1930s, which was generally known here as La Grande Noirceur, right? Literally translated to the Great Darkness, right?
The Great Depression.
Also the Great Depression, but not referring to specifically the Great Depression. But also a novel that, in terms of its literariness, doesn't offer a whole lot, but is rather emblematic of the feeling of the time, right?
Yeah. And by that, Patrick, means neither of us have actually, we've both been really busy, so our reading has not been super deep into the novel.
I've read this book before.
Yeah. But you read it in French. I got the English version. It's going to be very vibes-based, put into historical context, but it's going to work because this, if you've heard of any kind of nationalistic novel, you've heard of this novel before.
Yeah, exactly. We're using this as an example of how culture kind of reflected in life, and with a few key terms here and there. Yep. So you said before we started recording that you do know some stuff about good old Maurice Duplessis.
Well, you have to remember, Patrick, I was in the Quebec provincial education system.
Yes, you were.
Therefore, I spent a whole unit on Maurice Duplessis.
Holy shit, did you really?
Yeah.
I don't remember doing that. Okay.
I wrote an essay on him, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, it was great.
Okay.
I wrote about him more in his the 40s and 50s.
Right. So right before in his second and third terms type of.
Yeah, exactly. That was when more we learned about him and his sort of what was it, Quebec First or whatever programs.
Yes.
I remember the textbook portrayed it not as the worst. Textbook was
it's called The Great Darkness, which I'll just refer to it as that here. But it's called that way, not because he didn't ever do anything good, but because it kind of was overshadowed by his anti-democratic and very harsh way of dealing with things.
Yeah.
Right? That was very, very conservative.
Yeah, that's why
I
sort of really know. He was the sort of the founder of the modern pro-Quebec movement in a lot of ways. A lot of the things he did at the time set the stage for what Quebec is like today.
Exactly. Yeah. But also set the stage in the sense of also establishing a new pro-Quebec movement that was actively against him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And reframing what Quebec could be because of the way that he framed his particular mode of Quebec nationalism.
And the serpent shall eat its tail.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's very much an Ouroboros type of. Good. Yeah. I like that. A snake. That's what we'll just refer to him the entire time. It's just a slimy piece of
Christ. God.
No, but even if you look on more articles that are more specific to him, in the Canadian Encyclopedia, for example, which I know is not formally an academic source, but it does give a good sense of his time, right?
Mm-hmm.
They write that Maurice Duplessis' first term was a disappointment, right? They're quite explicit about that, where he did have some few things here and there, but they didn't quite live up to expectations. And again, it was very much overshadowed by him just actually going on benders and being a terrible person overall. So yeah, it's a bit of a wild time. So that's pretty much where you're at with Maurice.
Yeah, with good old Maurice. What was he called? Referred to as the Black Rabbit or something?
Oh, I actually didn't write it down in my notes, but something like that.
I'm pretty sure it was a rabbit. Right? No, it was because he wanted the Quebec people to procreate so much to create more Quebec.
Oh yeah, okay.
I remember.
Yeah. He was also known as Go ahead.
For those who don't remember, we have a word for that, and that word is eugenics.
Oh, do you want to know the best part?
Go ahead.
How it even ties it. Throughout most of his career, what was the term that he was universally known as outside of the rabbit moniker?
What?
That is also seen in such terms as Il Duce for Mussolini and
Il
Führer for Hitler.
Oh no, the dictator, the tyrant.
He was called the chief, le chef.
Fuck off. And we call that fascism, kiddos.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that he was outright a fascist.
But
it is very funny that
he's showing some tendencies.
It is very funny that someone who has been painted in a rather demagogue-like way, right, would have that name also, which sees a lot of parallel with his European counterparts right around that same time.
Oh, it's the same way, like, technically Donald Trump isn't a fascist. Technically, It's still a democratic nation.
But people around him throw up Nazi symbols.
Yeah. So let's talk about him. And do you mind if I start going through the top points so we can set the stage?
No, go ahead, please.
All right. So he's elected as a member for 12 years. And the provincial government, we have to specify Duplessis did not get involved really with federal governance as far as being like member of House of Commons, Prime Minister. He was all provincial.
Yeah.
Duplessis was leader of the Provincial Conservative Party in 1933, which is interesting because provincially, the Conservative Party in Quebec has never, it's rare for them to do super well.
That's true. Yeah. At the time, though, we have to remember there weren't as many parties, right?
No.
The Bloc wasn't there. We do often get liberal. Yeah, which is pretty much conservative. So
that's just it. So it's against. They're not affiliated. We have our own French flavored conservatism.
Yeah, we do have a formal conservative party, but it's never the one that wins.
Yeah, no, we have Le CAQ, which is conservative, but in poutine flavored.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Very.
So, and again, setting the stage for modern Quebec politics.
Yeah.
Duplessis would eventually partner off with Paul Gouin, leader of l'Action Libérale Nationale, and form the Union Nationale, the UN. I hope nobody ever uses those two letters for something ever again.
Right around this time.
Yeah.
But what is interesting, before we go too far off as well into the fact that he was never really federal, he did try to be.
I did not know that, actually.
Yeah, very briefly, but he was unsuccessful at it, and so he did stay within provincial politics for most of his life. He was named a judge by Sir Robert Borden, who we've talked about.
The Bordenmobile.
Yeah, the Bordenmobile. Exactly. So there is a
Mr. Monopoly.
There is a little bit
that's
of
who you want, fucking again, corporate backing political leaders. Where have I seen that before?
Yeah, Borden was not the worst one. Are you thinking of Bennett?
I think I am thinking Bennett. Yeah, that's it. Bennett and Mobile.
Yeah, there you go. The Bennett buggy.
Bennett buggy, that's the one. Still not a great look though, Borden.
No. But so there was a brief attempt at federal Conservative Party candidacy, but it never really went anywhere. So that's it. Right. And I did start my notes pretty much with his first elections, but his backstory is pretty similar to a lot of Quebecois people at the time, right? His mother was Anglo-Irish, right? Scottish-Irish, right?
He tried to get into art school, got rejected, decided to form a new political party.
Called himself the chief. He had a weird mustache. Everyone liked him. They clapped for way too long when he was arriving on stage because it was awkward if you stopped clapping.
He would start his speeches very quietly, and then he would build until he was banging on the podium and shouting and waving his arms a bunch.
Yeah.
God.
He was
we're stupid.
And again, right from the start, right before he even got elected, he was a very fervent Catholic, right? And this, I think, is an important thing to note because it will inform his political career going forward. He was.
I mean, we already talked about the whole giving birth thing, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's the Monty Python joke. The Catholics don't know how to use a condom.
It's the everybody joke.
Exactly.
So he forms the Union Nationale. He defeats the Liberals, who had been in power since 1897. And this basically sets the stage for all major Quebec politics. It basically just switches between Liberal and then whatever big major Quebec National Party there is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Quebec goes back and forth. Right now, we're on the Quebec National side with Monsieur Legault.
L'avenir Québec, yep. Mm-hmm.
Monsieur Legault, who I'm going to zip my mouth on that one. I'm going to zip my mouth before I say something really bad. Anyway, And so he starts passing his legislation because he gets it pretty handily, right? Like there's not a lot of opposition left.
He basically wins the seat 9. Like he's very well established in his own riding. And very popular, and his plan is his seat.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and so because of that, he gets to put in things like the padlock law, and which gives police. Because at the time, you have to remember this is the Red Scare.
Well, it's okay. So let's talk about that, right? Like this, we're talking here the 1920s and 30s, and we've already spoken about like the Communist Party of Canada, right? And
communism,
hammer, right? Like
sickle,
all that fun stuff. And I recently, like, just to remind people who may or may not have seen or listened to that episode, I should say,
Patrick is a communist.
Sure. But not just that, like we think of the Red Scare as like the 1950s, and true.
It's been going for a while.
There was definitely a first Red Scare right after the Russian Revolution here. And any type of left-leaning party that was suspected of any kind of quote unquote communism, right, would have been very much prejudiced against, right? And that when I say anything left-leaning, it's like wanting a union would have been too much for some people, right? Or wanting better conditions for your workers or anything like that, right? Right down to like actual political socialism, whatever. Like all that spectrum would have been extremely prejudiced against, with laws, police repression, and so on. Downright censorship, or as well. So yeah, that's the context here, right? But had you ever heard of the padlock law? Because it is like a major piece of Duplessis legislation. Yeah.
I think briefly, yeah. Again, when we learned about, but back in high school, you don't really look at the communist parts of things.
Sure. Yeah.
Because again, the focus is on like communism talk is focused on the 50s and the 60s and all that.
Yeah.
But it probably was mentioned. And it's just you're giving the police the authority to, go in, go to buildings that they think are housing political enemies.
Yep.
And they do it at the night. They break a lot of windows, so there's a lot of glass on the ground. Some people might call it a night of broken glass.
Stop!
I'm not saying Duplessis was Hitler.
You're not saying Duplessis.
But I'm just saying if Duplessis was to buy something, he'd probably buy it for $14.88. God
damn you. No one's going to understand that reference in our audience, and I hate you so much for it.
It's one for them, one for me.
Yeah, exactly. But
I know he's not. All joking aside, he's not that bad. But you do see, again, it's reflective of the time in that countries around the world were all having like these fascist tendencies.
Yeah, exactly.
As a big response to communism, and it goes to show that not even in the free world of North America, fascism still exists in a form, not as a total fascist dictator, but there was signs that it might have become that way, if not if nothing was to be done.
Yeah, not just as a response to left-wing politics as Duplessis would, but also like the First World War, as we had talked about, just happened. The Great Depression was in the process of happening. So like people wanted the promise of stability that fascism offered, right? Or authoritarianism offered. And that's the trap, right? That's the great trap. It was like, well, Hitler was a bad guy, but at least the trains ran on. It's like, well, that's not what you want. Like nobody actually wants that.
But the best joke in the Barbie movie. How could I be a fascist? I don't control the trains.
Yeah, right. I forgot about that one. Thank you. But it is emblematic, right, of that trap, and that willingness for people to have some kind of stability, politically, socially.
That's just it. And again, that's what people really just want. They want some kind of stability because we as a species hate change. And so that's why the left always has such a hard time gaining a foothold, gaining lots of traction, because it requires major reform and change.
Yes, exactly.
And so, but random question: do you think Duplessis was the trains running on time when Duplessis was in power?
I guess, as far as I know, he didn't disrupt that much.
Okay.
To be honest, I've never seen anything about that in particular. But as far as I think
it's interesting. I think it's it's another interesting parallel.
Interesting. But this, I want to just like highlight the padlock law, not because it's emblematic of his politics, but also because it would be representative of how he dealt with various issues throughout his political career as well. Right? You're very right. Not only did it allow police officers to like come in the middle of the night and so on, but like the printing and distribution of material that was deemed, right? It didn't even actually have to be, but was deemed to be supposedly communist, was illegal. And there was pressure federally, right? Especially by the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, which was kind of, and other groups, right? It wasn't just the who were afraid in this case, but were concerned of how this actually posed a threat to Canada's so-called claim of freedom of expression. But ultimately, nothing ever happened. The padlock was
right.
And in this case, the padlock is actually literally be locked out of home, place of work, right? Like people who tried to unionize were actually busted and then locked out of their place of work trying to.
Yeah.
Padlock is a literal shear.
To get rid of the padlocks, you'd probably need some pretty long knives. And, you'd have to break the padlocks at night when nobody could see you. It'd be a night of long knives. One would see. It just won't stop. I'm sorry.
So
Duplessis loses.
But that's the thing. So he did capture seats in 36, and he calls an election in 39. So it's a very short period of time. And basically, he tried to consolidate power right before the war, right, is what he was trying to do, right? On the eve of war, there was a major debate happening, right?
Rookie mistake.
First of all, rookie mistake, but also what was the great debate about World War II that was happening?
Fascism.
Well, that, and also in Canada specifically, conscription.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So he wanted to call an election and get the people on his side for the war. So before I want to talk about that, like just turning back to some other articles, we did talk about the padlock law, but he did have some successful credit schemes for farms, right? So that's, again, very emblematic of his time, right? A farm credit scheme, which would have allowed for agriculturists in Quebec to actually establish and grow their farms.
10 out of 10.
He did establish a commission on fair wages and did allow for certain provisions to destitute mothers, single mothers usually who couldn't work, and handicapped.
Because the mothers are the ones we really need to destitute.
Right. For destitute mothers and the blind. Right. So there was a few things here and there, right, that were actually achieved, but it's drop in the bucket of
compared to what really happened.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And even Duplessis as a figure himself, and I'm mentioning this now because it will be funnier later, is that despite being a very fervent Catholic in his youth and throughout his life, he also never married, and he was kind of an alcoholic bachelor.
Lovely. So how nice for him.
He just kind of lived as this bumbling drunk for most of his life while preaching the great virtues of Catholicism, So 10 out of 10, Maurice. No notes.
Would elect him again.
Oh, yeah. Said no one in Quebec in 1939.
Yeah.
Yeah. He got trounced. Mostly because he was pro-conscription. He was actually in favor of it, and the Liberals, the Liberals were actually the ones who promised that the Quebec people would be protected. Or that the Francophones, at the very least, had they were their best insurance against forced overseas.
The communist scare.
Right, sure. He kind of went on the down low for a few years, right? For the war years, basically the Liberals stayed in power in Quebec throughout the war years. And then he came back in a big bad way, right? He had stopped drinking during the war.
Big bad way.
Right? He stopped drinking during the war because his health collapsed. He basically got pneumonia and diabetes. He's like, well, that's a wake-up call. He did the right thing for once for his own personal health.
For once, he did something right.
And became a teetotaler. Good for you,
God.
I guess.
Good for you, Queen. Pop off.
And yeah, so he'd be reelected in 1944 and never leave power until his death. Right. So for the next 15 years, he would be in power nonstop. So it's technically a second term, but in reality, it's just an endless series of terms until 1959 when he died.
Yeah, they keep going. They don't stop coming.
No, exactly. Do you want to keep going on some of the notes, or?
Sure, let's do it. So he'd get back his power, becomes pro-business, welcomes American investments, rural electrification, credits for farmers. And again, that's not bad stuff. Like, you want to take care of your farmers. He understood that.
My grandmother got electricity under Duplessis, actually.
Yeah, of course. And there is something to be said for some of those ideas of like supporting your lowest working class.
Yep.
He transformed the UN, not the United Nations, the Union Nationale. Yeah. Created a powerful electoral machine, basically cementing it as the second party in Canada. Like, there's a lot of parties, but in Quebec, really, there's the Liberals, and then there's the whatever Quebec party is currently in fashion at the moment.
Yeah. But he basically did through patronage. He was like, yeah, it's fine if we receive contributions from businesses.
Yeah, obviously. Money's fine.
There's no problem here. I don't see what you're talking about. And everyone was mad at him.
Yeah, but whatever. He was a true Catholic through and through. Same with conservative values. He brought religion back to government where it belongs, obviously. Separation of church and states for fucking losers.
Absolute dipshits. Yep.
Absolute mouth-breathing, red-blooded commies.
Who actually have a lot in common with Catholic values when you think about it, but
Oh, it's like a friend of mine when he said, like, people love the U.S. military, but they don't understand that the U.S. military is the most socialist thing in all of America.
Yeah, that's right. It's great. But yeah, like, I think that's a really important point. Like, Catholicism was for Duplessis a cohesive force, right? Like, it's what brought or was supposed to bring people together.
And it was. At the time, Catholicism was where people met. They got their news. They and in some way, what Duplessis did with Catholicism was like Trump working with Elon and Twitter.
Sure. Yeah.
Controlling the news, controlling that cohesion, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we say controlling in this case, it's true. Like, the Catholic Church did have extreme, I don't know if extreme, but it did have a lot of influence on the ins and outs of power, right, within the Union Nationale, right? Like, and the Catholic
decided
Church
at the time that they were going to open their own department, actually, in the provincial government. It was based on efficiency, creating a nice efficient. And sorry, I got that mixed up with something else.
I thought you were actually going on a serious point for once, and I was like, "Oh crap! Okay, let's go."
Here's the thing: I can't take these people. Like, I know I should take them seriously, but I can't. I really can't.
It's more difficult to take them seriously in hindsight. Like, it's easier to make jokes at Duplessis' expense now, but if it happens now, it is very terrifying anyways.
Oh, don't get me wrong. Trump is still terrifying. I'm still making Trump jokes at Trump's expense.
Sure.
Because all I see, like, and the thing where these people come, like, I'm sure Duplessis had a very normal childhood, but there was something that happened, like, some Anglo kid must have bullied him at some point to create this, like, this thing that broke him just a little bit, This thing that made him into this little man that needed to prove something, that needed to show off something.
Right.
And that's all I can see with these.
I think that's
like,
yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
And so, like, like, when I hear these things about him promoting, like, when I see things like, electrification for rural farmers, that's awesome. That's great. I can see that as like a serious thing. But when we get into their very crazy rhetoric, I don't see anything except, like, who hurt you?
Yeah. Did mommy slap you too many times?
Yeah. Did daddy use the belt too much? Like,
yeah. But that's the thing. Like, and even some of the electrification bill, like you were saying, or the wage commission that I mentioned that he started in his first term, like, that would actually come back, and it would be beneficial to a lot of Quebecers because under his government, the Quebec government introduced Canada's most generous minimum wage bill at the time, right?
Yeah.
So, like, there was some interesting stuff going on there. And even like home ownership assistance acts were extremely generous here. It's almost like in order to have proper home ownership, you actually need intervention, and you can't just let it be like a free market thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting.
Provincial income tax scheme, like all these things he like brought in.
Right. So it's like he is a very pro-business person. Don't get me wrong, and very conservative, very Catholic. So there is a lot there.
But he seems to actually believe his rhetoric that businesses will, as opposed to a lot of people who are pro-business. Pro-business is just it's a glossy way to be, I'm greedy. Duplessis actually seemed to believe what he was saying.
And actually acted on it a lot.
Yeah, right? For sure.
And you can kind of, you can disagree with the religious aspect, of course, right? That's people's rights. But like you're saying, that's a huge part of what made society cohesive. People helped each other through that vehicle of the church.
Yeah. And I think that's just it. If because like we sort of said, there's a lot of parallels to be drawn between communism and Catholicism and the church. It's just about labeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about labeling and packaging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the Catholic Church also founded the modern Quebec education system.
Yeah,
which has as somebody who works or was working in the Quebec education system. My God, but there's also a lot of benefits to be had for it. Like the Quebec population is fairly well educated.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing, right? His government aided the church financially to fulfill its educational and social responsibility. Right? And that was a big thing. It's like it was technically on paper really great, but also what it gives is actually multiple generations of kids who are raised in extremely conservative value, which of course later would be pushed back against by the time the 60s roll around. But see, this idea or this almost stereotype, right, of a Quebec schoolroom that's run by nuns and priests, right, that kind of smack you on the fingers. That was kind of a reality for a bit. It was barely an exaggeration because it was just everywhere. That's who ran schools. And it was in part because they were financially provided for by the government, right? They were also, so for good or bad, that's really what it was. Yeah. I don't know if you had anything to add on that, but yeah.
No, it makes sense to me. Sounds about right.
Yeah. He was also, we kind of alluded to this, he was very much in favor of provincial autonomy, right? Which is where the Quebec nationalism part comes in.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, I think we all are a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. But, go ahead.
Well, it's just that that's nothing special to Quebec. We still get that everywhere. Like Alberta is all about provincial autonomy right now, except for when they need to get money from the government to prop up their failing oil businesses, but whatever.
I mean, Quebec did also receive a lot of money from the federal government in our
100%
equalization pay.
But Most Quebec businesses are actually successful.
That's true.
Can't say the same about Alberta oil.
Nope. Anyway, but
there is one other really important thing.
Yeah, please.
That Duplessis. So at the time, Duplessis is anti-union, obviously, right?
Yep.
Because he's pro-business. So that causes like a lot of issues, especially in the big cities, because you have large population centers. And biggest city in Quebec and second biggest in all of Canada, Montreal. Archbishop has to resign. That makes big news because that's a bit of a strike between him and his Catholic Church. But in Montreal, a certain journal starts up, Cité Libre, and it was co-founded by a young man who has nice hair, a young man who he just might not be ready yet, but he might be ready one day.
He sounds like the kind of guy who would wear a rose in his lapel.
He sounds like the kind of guy that might just cause some mania.
Anyway, moving right along.
A young pet, if you will. A young pet of the government, Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Yeah, that's right. He made his name during this time.
Yeah, well, it's that fascinating thing where we create our enemies a lot of the time.
Yeah.
If not for Duplessis, Trudeau might not get into power. If not for this, that doesn't happen. So we create these things have to create each other. It's a very deadly cycle.
Yeah,
God bless America.
Like, Cité Libre and all of that would have been, like you said, would have been founded about 10 years before Duplessis' death, right? You're starting to see already a little bit of pushback, or at least more public pushback. The Archbishop, like you were saying, because he was supporting the workers who were striking in asbestos, right? The asbestos that was filling people's walls, right? It's actually named after or the city is named after that, right? That's where a lot of the mining was. And so, yeah, they went on strike because they didn't want to keep dying. And Duplessis was like, no, shut the fuck up. I need to warm my home.
I need to, yeah.
Right, like we should do a whole episode on the asbestos strike, right? But that's not where we're at, like right now. That's not the point of this episode. And I actually do have a book that talks about that, right? Like an actual literature piece of literature that I have in mind that we can use for that. That's quite interesting. But yeah, like the asbestos strike is really this pivotal moment when people see that it's starting to be okay to actually push back against this institution that has offered some things, but ultimately has been very poor where civil liberties are concerned. How do you square that? Are you like pro-American business, but also pro-provincial autonomy? Like if you say that today, especially today with the tariff thing, people seem to have a pushback against that. Right?
I mean,
like you can't have American empire and provincial autonomy necessarily.
Yeah, and I think again that's how the snake eats its own tail. Like it's the part of the values where they clash, and that's going to cause problems for a while.
Yeah,
and it's going to cause problems for Quebec for a while, and that's why the current Quebec nationalist tendencies don't talk about the American empire part. Like they learn to drop that because it doesn't work. It doesn't fit.
But it was a very. I know he sold wood like a lot because obviously we're known for like wood production here and all of that. He sold wood dirt cheap to the Americans, and so it gave them it allowed the Americans to be a bit more lenient and all of that in their business practices with Quebec. And so for a while it was rather beneficial, but that's the kind of thing that's not sustainable in the long run.
Yeah,
you can't constantly sell your by like $1 per ton or something like that. You just can't do that, right?
No.
It did allow for very rapid developments in Quebec, that's for sure. But you know, in this case, literally at what cost? And again, that's something that later nationalists, I think you're correct in saying they would push back against, right? Actually, not even later nationalists. The book we're referring to today is railing against that, like already. So I don't know. It is quite interesting. Just another notable thing, he created the Quebec flag, or mandated the creation of the Quebec flag in 1948, right? So you can thank him for that.
Again, weird use of a very like France symbol.
Yep, but it's a Catholic symbol first and foremost.
I guess, yeah.
True. Because the Spanish also used it, the Scots also used it.
Yeah. It's just a very appropriate symbol.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if he took like a symbol that was meant to be like Buddhist and about peace and stuff, and then turned it into a symbol of his like government dictatorship. I'm just saying, religious symbol appropriated from like. I'm just saying, there's parallels, man.
There's some interesting parallels. Do what you will with that information.
Do your own research, man. Do your research.
Fascist light.
Yeah. Diet fascism.
Oh fuck.
Is your old fascism just going down too hard? Is it just causing problems? Try diet fascism. When you're looking to slim down.
Yeah. So one of the ways, I just want to highlight this because I didn't put it in the notes. One of the ways that Duplessis' party specifically maintained power was actually, despite being provincially based, interacting with both municipal and federal parties in really important ways, right? Like really pushing for other conservative governments to be put into power, right? So it intervened in Montreal mayoral elections in the 50s. It helped elect 50 of John Diefenbaker's conservatives in Quebec in 1958. Like it was quite active in trying to get as many conservatives as possible on all levels of government. And that's, I think, one of the things that allowed it to be so effective as a party for so long, right? Is that as a party, they understood that they couldn't just operate on their level. And I think that's, again, something that's very important to keep in mind for modern day politicians, is that you have to play ball with other people. Right? And I'm not saying that every politician should intervene on every level of government necessarily, but that Duplessis, through like duplicitous means, right? Actually was
Yeah.
able to
Duplicitous.
intervene and actually garner power through that method, which the church obviously helped with. And so,
Loved. They adored.
Yeah. Reminding people that I don't know if actually that's a real story. I've always heard it. I don't know if it's apocryphal, but I remember hearing that once, where one of the things that the church would say during Mass was that was reminding its congregates that heaven was blue, the color of the Conservative Party, and that hell was red, right? The color of the Liberal Party. And so just literally strike the fear of God into people through political means. So yeah, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly a story I've heard of that time. Anyway, anything else you want to add?
I think that covers it just about for Duplessis.
Yeah, cool. Anyway, he died in 1959, and
he died as he lived.
Did you ever hear that story, actually, of the day?
Cyanide. Wait, no, sorry, that was somebody else.
No.
One more for the road.
So
this is what Duplessis said from his bunker.
He basically, on the day of his funeral, right? It was a very, very hot day. And do you know what people said at that time? Is that it was the gates of hell that were opening up to embrace to the grasps of Satan, which I find incredible. So like immediately people were like, yeah, great. Like finally this is over. This time of intellectual stultification and social darkness. But hey, at least we had low taxes. Great. So yeah, we'll come back to like Quebec eventually. Anyway.
Anywho,
I want to briefly talk about the book. I know we've been talking for like half an hour already at this point, but
well, we need to set the because like it is a lot of the book itself is not. It's more important about what the book represents, which was the fear that Duplessis was trying to get into people, the ideas that he was trying to form in people's brains.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. And in many ways a response to that, good and bad. So have you ever heard of Félix-Antoine Savard? I know you're not like super well versed in Quebec literature in general, or like French Quebec literature. Have you ever heard of this author before?
No, never.
No.
We're back to normal Mackenzie.
Just very briefly, classic author of the time. He was a priest, right? He became a priest in 1922, Félix-Antoine Savard. And he taught at Chicoutimi Seminary until 1927. And I do want to highlight, right, Chicoutimi here as being part of the more northern part of Quebec, right, at Tibi. And he Savard would serve as curate in several locations in that area before actually launching a literary career, which kind of launched in the late 30s. But what's interesting about Savard, and something that we didn't mention, is that he was one of the priests Aboriginal people in the region of claim land back to the west. Right, he was actively participating. I tend to think it's a 17th and 18th century thing, but context of the North happened right around this time, the 1920s, 30s. That's when people were moving more northward.
Right.
Much to the dismay of Indigenous populations.
But it's always to their dismay, isn't it?
Ain't that true? So he basically encouraged, right, pioneer mindset towards, and a lot of his initial tales, right, were actually very much encouraging that, either through folk tales, folk songs, light novels, and all of that very much idealized life in northern Quebec, which, if you've ever been to northern Quebec, there's nothing to idealize about it. It's mostly just rocks, snow.
I have been to northern Quebec. Very pretty place, don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's mostly rocks.
It's pretty in a sublime kind of way, right? Not in like, I don't know if that makes sense. But like, despite his position as a colonialist, he would actually, through his assemblage of folk tales and folk songs that he would actively do, he led to the formation of the Université de Laval's folklore archives in 1944. So we owe a lot to him as far as conserving these kind of oral traditions that people had, right? So that's kind of cool. And he would actually lecture at that university and so on. By far, his most well-known novel today is the one we're talking about, Menaud, maître, draveur, which in English has the translation of The Boss of the River, which, right, a draveur is basically a logger, what the closest translation would be. And yeah, it's his most well-known and certainly his first novel. He would actually win a Governor General's Award for another novel after called Le Barachois. I've never read it, but apparently it's good. But I think the test of time has very much just kept Menaud, maître, draveur in the public consciousness somewhat, right? As much as any Quebec novel from 1944 is in the public consciousness of anyone, right? Which is me, maybe.
We are the weapon.
Yeah, so what little of the novel you did make out, or you did get to read, what did you make of it, right? Like, what's your impression of the novel? First of all, what is the novel? Do you know?
So the novel it's about like a logger in rural Quebec, basically trying to create a very Don Quixote character where they are trying to, their madness is about them railing against the death of Quebec nationalism or whatever.
Yeah.
But it didn't pick up like Don Quixote did because it's too tied. No, it's true because it tied to its It's tied to its circumstances. Whereas the idea of chivalry will live forever.
Yeah.
And so that's why the novel is not. It didn't become what you want. Well, first, it's a Canadian novel, and those, unless you're Margaret Atwood, those never do well. Second of all,
especially not a regional novel.
Yeah, a regional novel. But again, it's just the issue is what I think what it really fails on is, again, it's very much tied to a very specific idea, and it's very much tied to this, like, it's a very real belief and idea. It's not something that people can just get from nowhere.
And just to add a little bit to that, right? So you're right, he is like a logger, and he's the main character, Menaud, right, is a veteran of that, and he's particularly fired up, right, to act against foreign interference. And by foreign interference here, we mean Anglo-Canadians, which are the worst kind of foreign interference for a Quebecois person in 1944, apparently. Right? And foreign interference exploiting Quebec's resources, i.e.
Right.
Right. Like, that's really what kicks off the novel, is this fact. And specifically, he's pushed to actually act upon this and be incensed by a piece of literature, another classic that actually does exist called Maria Chapdelaine, right, which was a novel published about 100 years prior to Menaud, maître, draveur. And just, I have the translation here, but he's fired up by a quote that says, "Around us have come strangers we scorn as foreigners. They have taken all the money, yet in the land of Quebec, nothing will change." And he's like, yeah, that's true. Screw those Ontarian people who are coming in and taking our resources.
Fucking Ontarians. Fucking Torontonians.
But it does get at something, again, that would be picked up by other Quebecois. Like, Quebec nationalism would very much pick up on this sentiment again and again, right? Even into the 70s, 80s, and even today, whenever we talk about American, right? Or other Anglophones.
When I think it's, how do I say it? It's this idea, it's always going to be, it's an easy way to, like, that's always going to be a way to prey on people, is prey on their fear of somebody else, any kind of other.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So it's like, yeah, I'm not surprised it happened, but I'm also not surprised it got drowned out in the white noise.
Yeah. You mean there's the book itself? Oh, yeah.
The book, but also the ideas, like, it's always going to keep happening, this idea of be afraid of the other person on the other side of the river. They're from the wrong side of the tracks. And then we're going to go snap at each other in an alleyway. Boy, Bernie. That's the real problem. Duplessis was a Montague and he lost his Capulet.
That's very good.
Well, I'm not wrong. Like,
no.
and again, that's what I can't like. I know it's all very serious. We're supposed to take it very seriously, but all this stuff just feels so like silly in the grand scheme of things to me. Like it's just
Right. Right. Okay. I'm trying to find the. Do you have the passage with you when his
where he
son?
dies.
Yeah, but not him, but where his son
Oh
dies.
no, I do not.
I'm trying to find it.
If you have it in French, you could say it in French.
Yeah, I could. But I'm flipping through the archive version of the book I have and trying desperately to find it. And this is riveting.
But essentially, his son dies.
Yeah, like the point I wanted to make here was that there are some really interesting and powerful, right? Like his son.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't. It has these very like it actually does have these very powerful moments, I'm sure, and it has this beautiful, vivid imagery. It's just the core is still hollow.
Yeah, but that's
Like
the thing.
he's made a
yeah, go ahead.
He's made a cake and he forgot to put the cake in. You know, he forgot to put the dough.
I think you're being really harsh on it. Like,
yeah, that's true. For somebody who did read the whole book, I am being very harsh. But it's, these books like this, I cannot get behind. I just like fundamentally.
But that's the thing. Like, I do agree with you that there's a lot of them, but I do find it interesting that these kinds of books show up at different moments when they're neat, type of thing. It almost seems
it's
like
always the same moment. It's the moment of fear. It's when people are afraid. They're scared about something going on somewhere else. They're scared that, and it's just it's predatory to me. It's very predatory.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think that's true. Like with hindsight, that can definitely see. I do understand why it would have been so successful at that time. It did very much speak, especially in 1944.
These books are always successful at their time. They never last. It's a very fleeting success because you can only be afraid for so long. Fear does not last forever.
Yeah. I can't find the passage I had in mind. I don't know why I didn't write it down, but the what I wanted to highlight was like this idea that kicks off the book, right? That in Quebec, yet in the land of Quebec, nothing will change, is very much represented by Menaud's son, Jason, drowning. Because the whole subtext is that Jason is the one that can actually escape, right? It's even said explicitly at some point in the text, like, oh, Jason is the one that will have the opportunities, right? He's the one that I'm doing this for, right? Classic story. Again, you've seen this 1,000 times, which kind of reinforces your point. But the idea that like, oh, we're doing this for the next generation of people, and they're the ones that are going to reap the benefits of this. That's why we're doing.
And they're going to be the ones that are going to be afraid.
Right. And yet, by the very nature of what we're doing, that's what kills Jason, right? So it becomes a form of irony in the story.
The snake ate its own tail.
Yeah, but I think I want to highlight it because I think Menaud, because I think Savard as a writer understands how narrative functions in a really compelling way, and he manages to use that effectively in the text. Is it breaking radically new ground? No. But I do think it shows a literary ability on his end that I think is worthwhile and does demonstrate that people are starting to like come into their own in a cultural sense, right? That is recognizable to a lot of people. Anyway, I do think that's kind of use of irony throughout the text. It's very much represented by this. One of the things, so at some point, right, he tries to rally people to oppose foreigners, right? And again, he's just met with very little success, right? It is a very depressing novel in that sense. He goes into the forest during a snowstorm in search of this quote unquote stranger, right? The titular foreigner, not titular, but like the so-called foreigner. And the stranger has threatened to cut off the local people from access to the territory. And he's like the main character, Menaud, barely survives, right? He doesn't actually succeed. He's just foisted at every point, right? And this is kind of a turning point in the novel that I think is interesting because he progressively sinks into madness. And the novel becomes kind of postmodern in that sense, or modernist, I should say, right? In which the narrative itself just kind of crumbles around this guy's mind, which is, I think, again, where it becomes interesting. Because you don't imagine a novel like this, right? You think it's going to go in one direction, and then it doesn't, right? Usually,
and then it switches.
But that's the thing. Like I think you're correct in saying that like the first part is very much something that you've seen before, but usually you would expect a story like that to actually follow through and the stranger leave, right? Like the hero actually succeeds in the end, but he doesn't, right? Like he goes progressively insane, and
tilting at windmills.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is again good.
But he also succeeds because the final words of the farmer is, "This is no ordinary madness. It is a warning."
Yeah, but he doesn't.
The message has gone out. The message has popped.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And people are listening. That's his success. Again, the idea is, and again, that's similar to the book. The idea was for the book to send a message of success and kick off something.
Yeah.
Which, debate whether or not it did.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to highlight this point though, where because you've brought this point up before, right, many times. And I think it's a really good one where Quebec kind of occupies this bizarre dual position within a settler society, right? As like simultaneously perpetrators of settler colonialism, but also framing themselves for a lot of their history as people who were victims of colonialism as well. And I think this is a really good novel to talk about this with, right? Because this is exactly what we're talking about. It's a guy who's being really pissy and going crazy about the fact that people are taking his land, right? Which is, again, peak irony that I don't think Savard intended. Right? Like, as someone who did actively encourage the colonization of Quebec's north, I don't think he intended it to be any kind of great message about the indigenous population or any kind of parallels in that sense. But it is rather ironic, right? And is demonstrative of this kind of dual position of Quebec. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on that, but I just I know you've mentioned this point before, and I think kind of cool to see it.
No, I think you're right. I think you're on it.
Yeah.
You are hitting the nail, as they might say.
Yay.
Don't break any glass.
Right.
And
go ahead.
It's a tradition of French Canadian nationalism, sure. But that's nationalism anywhere. The martyrism, like the martyrism of it all.
Yeah.
These things will thrive on building themselves on the back of the dead worker, the dead farmer. And this isn't just for the far right. This is the left too. The Soviet Russia built its communism claiming it was on the back of all the dead workers.
Sure. I do like that though. This is no ordinary madness, right? That ends the novel. I like the highlighting of ordinary here. There is an admission that it's mad, that the situation perhaps is mad, and that he's mad because of it. But it shouldn't be the type of madness that you're expecting. Like, what do you make of something like ordinary madness? I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are about something.
About this madness, this different type of madness?
Ordinary madness. What does that mean to you? Because isn't it a contradiction in terms, in a sense?
Yeah, it is.
I'm putting you on the spotlight on this one.
No, because I think he's trying to. The point, ordinary madness is a contradiction only if you take it as madness of a personal kind. This man was a madness of an entire society. That is what makes it unordinary. He was being mad for everybody's sake, Right. It was his madness was what everybody should have been feeling.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that. Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's ordinary in the sense common, right? Like it's a madness that should be common to everyone and yet isn't, right? Which is why it's a warning, so that it should be common, right? Is that what you're kind of?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it should be more order. People should, and you kind of see that again, right? Today, when we claim things, and it's like, how is this not more normal, right? That people think in this way or that way. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add about this. I wasn't expecting. It's not a very long novel, and I wasn't expecting to talk about it a whole lot.
I think it is interesting that he re-released it 6 times.
Yeah, but it was a huge success, right?
Yeah.
Like, its portrayal of madness is very much not what people expected, right? This was a time when people were still reading like idyllic types of literature, especially during the war, right? People wanted to feel good about themselves, and he was just not giving them that. And it is a technically well-written novel. Like, it's a very imagistic type of novel, and yet almost Hemingway-like in its directness and its way of speaking. And he also incorporates like regional expressions that we would later see in people like famously Michel Tremblay, right? But like 20 years later. So he is very much setting the scene for a lot of Quebec literature to come.
Yeah.
So I can see why he would keep publishing it. It's a gold mine for for people at the time, right? Because it's so applicable in situations. Yeah. Is it 6 times? No, 5 times. Sorry. In 1964, he reshaped it for
yeah.
So almost. But any of these were like very much small modifications.
Yeah, like that was the usual kind of additions. But it's interesting the fact that in his own way, he obsessed over it the same way his character obsessed over it with the idea.
Yeah.
And it goes to show that like he really meant that. He really sort of seemed to believe that.
Yeah.
His
absolutely.
obsession over it.
Yeah.
And I think that's fascinating to me. Like these people who believe their rhetoric to this degree. There is something noble to be said in that.
Yeah. Again, like it can be very dangerous though. I don't think this novel is dangerous. That's not what I'm saying, right? Necessarily. I don't think it's going to do anything for anyone anytime soon. But it is that kind of belief and unacknowledged, uncritical look at yourself can be dangerous for everyone involved. But yeah, I don't know. I wanted to launch this into the ether as kind of like an interesting look at a literature that depicts a time of tension in Quebec that's going to kind of carry us into the next 30 years of Quebec's history in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. That's it. I don't know what else to add. Final thoughts?
No, it sounds about right.
Okay.
I don't know. We live in times again. I'm sure we're going to be getting similar novels.
Yeah, I try to avoid doing novels that are too similar, right? There are classics that I was like, we should talk about that because they're a classic, but I'm like, we've already talked about some of the issues, so I don't know why we would. Yeah, there's just some things. We'll see. We'll see. I do want to like we were making jokes about fascism. There was obviously actual fascism in Canada, right? And I do want to talk about that because I think that's really interesting. Like there were fascist riots and parties that were actively close to fascism. So despite all the jokes that we made about Duplessis' expense and his stupid mustache,
not wrong.
That we're not wrong. Like I do think I don't want to overshadow like actual fascism that tried to it like bring itself into
did.
Yeah. It was never quite as successful as other groups, but yeah, it did certainly exist. Yeah, and still exists.
They were the real bosses of the river.
Yeah. Next episode, I don't know.
We're getting close to World War II, so I feel like we're going to be there for a while.
Yeah, we're going to be there for a while. There's a few things that I want to fill in the gap. Like I want to do an episode on Africaville, which is in Nova Scotia.
Nice.
I want to do William Lyon Mackenzie King Part 2.
Of course.
Yep. I want to talk about Norman Bethune and like Western myths and
There's
Howard
just so
O'Hay.
much to do. But in the meantime, take us away, Patrick.
Thanks for listening. It was cool.
Wow.
Yeah, really know how to sell it. But no, honestly, like this was a bit of a shorter episode, but
a bit of an all over the place episode. We're slowly getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah, and if you do have any suggestions for any other episodes, let us know. We're always happy to get emails or comments. We get a lot of comments on our YouTube page. And yeah, don't forget to support us by sharing the episode with your friends or anything like that on Patreon. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. So without further ado, Mac had to do something else, so he dipped out. But cheers, everyone.